And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast. I'm Bud Elliott. That's Tom Fornelli. That's Danny Cannell. Chip Patterson today not with us, so you get the Bud Elliott doing an impersonation of Chip Patterson. This is the Cover 3 podcast. You're watching us on YouTube. You're giving us those thumbs up and those like and subscribe so you get those notifications when we do go live, or you're listening to us in your podcast feed. If you happen to be listening to us on Spotify, keep in mind you can give us a 5-star rating now for the first time ever. So all you green texters out there who love Spotify because you can't get Apple Podcasts, throw us those 5 stars on Spotify. We really appreciate that. And today we're really happy to be joined by Chris Hummer, the portal guru. Literally, we got the number 1 seed, y'all. The best portal guy in the business for 247 Sports. Hummer, man, welcome onto the show.
Thanks. Sorry to be one of those green texters in advance. I run that Android life, but I have dropped 5 stars for Cover 3 on Spotify because that's my platform of choice, and I appreciate you having me on.
Boom. So we only have an hour, roughly. There's so much to talk about with the portal. There's process. There's how teams handle it, how players handle it. We need to talk about who the top players are in the portal, which teams are changing their fortunes to the good or to the bad with the portal. But I wanted to open with, this is kind of year 2 now, right, of immediate eligibility. What are some of the key differences you're seeing this year, maybe compared to last year?
I think the volume of people in the transfer portal has increased, which is shocking given the number we had last year. I think we topped her out around 2,600. And like 2,000 of those were scholarship guys, maybe. We're on pace to be over 3,000 FBS players in the portal right now. So the volume is different. But I also think it's just the strategy that teams have looked at the transfer portal with. Before, it was kind of like a stopgap for a lot of programs. They used it as a way to either fix some roster holes in the short term to avoid getting fired, or they used it to curb a talent gap they might have had. But I think a lot of teams now are looking at it as a permanent strategy. They're permanently going to take 5 to 7 guys no matter what happens because of the availability of talent. And I also think a lot of players have begun to look at transferring as part of their path, frankly. Whereas before, 10 years ago, you might graduate transfer at the end of your career. Now I think players are starting to normalize it, and it's going to look like college basketball where you see a lot of these guys move 2 or 3 times, and it's just accepted because it's a normal part of the process. So I think that's been a huge change.
So do you think we see it like I clearly with the new rule, which lets you transfer 1 time without penalty? Like, do you think we see it come back? Like, do you think players will at least use a little bit more caution? Like, I almost feel like there's a rush because you have this freedom to choose and you can go without penalty. Like, do you think it slows a little bit, or do you think that, like you said, it's going to be like basketball? Or do you think we're just headed down this path where these numbers are just going to continue to soar?
I think it has to slow because right now we're seeing a lot of players, frankly, being processed because teams have to get under 85. So there are a lot of teams well over 85, and they have to get there no matter what. So you're seeing kids enter the portal that didn't really have a choice, frankly, which is a really unfortunate side effect of the way the NCAA handled the super senior rule and the COVID waivers. But I also believe that players are always going to, frankly, get some bad advice. Players are always going to make rash decisions. And we're always going to see unhappy players in unhappy situations. And the portal will always be there as an avenue to address that. Whether it's rash or not, it will be there. So I don't think it'll slow significantly. I will say we did a study 2 years ago looking at the 2019-20 data, and only 38.2% of scholarship players in the FBS ended up staying in the FBS once they entered the portal. So under 40%. And I would hope schools and parents and coaches are educating players on that, and that might curb the tide a little bit or stem the tide a little bit. But I don't think we're going to see much change in this regard unless there's a wide scale rule change that prevents this much volume from happening. I just think it's normal at this point.
So Chris, one kind of follow up I would have to that. We've only had 2 years where guys are immediately eligible, and that's probably been the huge impetus for dudes to jump into the portal because, we had the portal prior, but you still had to sit out a year. Next year, we will already have had 2 classes of guys who had the opportunity to use their free transfer. Do you think that could slow it? Just the guys who haven't transferred already might be might have a lower propensity to actually transfer either because they're starting or because they like where they are?
I mean, possibly. And given I will say we had 500 fewer high school kids signed last year, right? And we're tracking towards something similar to that this year as well. Maybe not quite that extreme. There are just going to be less bodies available to go in the portal, as you said. And normally I would say those can just be replaced by the high school kids coming in because we see a ton of freshmen transfer this year, true freshmen. But as you said, as we pointed out numerous times at 247 Sports, there are less high school players available. So that might slow it. But I still think we're going to average well over 10% of FBS scholarship players entering the portal a cycle, at least for the near future, especially with super seniors still being a thing for another 3 years. We're going to have all of those bodies without a place to go. So I think at least for the short term, we're going to see significant portal activity just because of the way things are set up.
And keep in mind, the high school class of 2021 didn't get to take visits anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that was the COVID recruiting year. So a lot of these guys, either the staff misevaluated or the player picked a school that he never got to visit. And the transfer process gives them a chance to actually go through the recruiting process, and you could take official visits as a transfer. So I don't know, like that we could still see more 2021 high school recruits hit the portal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're seeing a lot of that right now. Whenever you see a true freshman on the portal, you wonder what the heck happens.
Mm-hmm.
But as Bud said, you have to remember that a lot of these players didn't meet their coaches until they showed up on campus. We've seen 27 FBS, 28 now, I guess, FBS staff changes happen this offseason. Coaches are moving all over the place. And when you have the ability to instantly change your situation and somebody's in your ear telling you, because tampering's rampant right now. It's not, people aren't even trying to hide it at this point. You see a player go from one school to another school the next day with a connection that's quite obvious and clear. So when all of these things are happening at once, I think you're going to see a lot of that for sure. And it's very unstable for the freshmen and even the upcoming freshmen that didn't get to see a lot of campuses when they were making their visits. So I certainly think that plays a factor.
Why aren't more people tampering with Caleb Williams yet?
I think Caleb's family has their own priorities. There's certainly been plenty of tampering with Caleb, I think, but I think Caleb is one of the few people immune to tampering from a monetary perspective because he is already his family is very well off. Like his dad is a trainer in Maryland. They do very well for themselves. I think Caleb, frankly, has a few NIL deals that haven't been announced that are going to be worth a significant sum of money. I don't think he's worried about that. I think if there's any tampering from Caleb's perspective, it's how much leverage he can create over the situations he's looking to come into, in terms of the control he can have, I guess is a good way to put that. But I think they're on their own timeline. He's one of the few players in college football that can call their own shots. And I think you're seeing he and his family do a little bit of that right now.
All right, so I was on Sirius. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, how crazy is it that we've already reached that point where I know it's always existed to a degree, where certain players had that kind of leverage where they were able to kind of dictate the terms, but it's just wild to consider where this sport was only a few years ago to where we're now at a situation where like somebody like Caleb Williams is basically saying, no, we'll see what you do for me first. And then, I have this leverage. I'll come there. If you get this, you give me this, you get that, blah, blah, blah. It's crazy how much power has swung towards the players in the sport, considering how little they had as many as 3 or 4 years ago.
I mean, we were counting scoops of mashed potatoes, like 8 years ago for guys.
Mm-hmm.
So it is pretty different. And yeah, no, I think it's an enlightening situation. I'm sure Danny wishes he had the NIL power back in his days at Florida State. So it is quite compelling. I think we've seen a couple players this offseason flex that. Quinn Ewers, I think, is a really good example. They had requests from schools for sure that had to be met before he chose either one of those. And I don't think Caleb's are quite the same as Quinn's, but I think when he goes into Lincoln Riley's office, he's got some things the family is hoping to get done. I think when he meets with UCLA, it's the same thing. So I know Wisconsin's in the mix now. I don't know how much y'all want to talk about the schools that are actually in there for Caleb because it's an interesting group. But yeah, players have a lot of power right now.
Is that the group? So is that the group in your opinion, though? Is it just USC, UCLA, Wisconsin? Do you buy the idea that he's actually monitoring what's going on at Miami? Because I've heard different things on that.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of different things about Caleb. USC, UCLA, 100% in it. I can confirm that through multiple people. I have heard Wisconsin brought up a bunch. I have not brought it up in my reporting because I don't have enough people on the record saying that. I guess we're on a podcast, so we can speculate a little bit. LSU has been in there, as I understand it, like definitely. Miami a little bit, but I think they're going to probably stick with Tyler Van Dyke, and they don't have an offensive coordinator at this point, so that is complicated. I think there's a recent national champion that has rumored to be in there a little bit, but ultimately didn't go that direction because I think they're a little worried about their quarterback room disappearing. So I think those are the main schools kind of in the mix, but you would think Friday is going to be the deadline. That's the final day you can take classes at USC for the semester. But I think when you're Caleb Williams, you can always have a couple exceptions made for you if necessary. So I don't think it's a hard and fast deadline like it would be for a lot of people.
Maybe one of his requirements is that USC has somebody take those classes for him until he just makes his decision.
Right. Like a placeholder. Right? This is genius. So, Chris, if you are a head coach at State U, how hard are you lobbying to switch to the quarter system?
Oh, it's a huge advantage. You can, like, if you're UCLA, which is on the quarter system, I don't know when they start spring practice specifically, but like Caleb could technically walk in there in mid-March, not have to go to class for a semester. Although you do have to have a certain number of credits. I will say that to be eligible next year. So there is some resistance there. But the flexibility you have on the quarter system is significant. And I think that's a complaint of when I'm talking to like player personnel directors and coaches, there's an imbalance in the transfer portal and frankly, not quite as much in recruiting, with the way the systems are set up. The quarter system over a semester system makes a difference. When you start your semester makes a difference because of the 7-day window, you can get transfers in. There's a lot of little things like that people don't think about. And I think a lot of player personnel directors especially would love to see the playing field even in that way, because they're just like little things like Ole Miss starting late. That is like a little bit of an advantage with the second semester because they can get kids on a visit later. They can kind of extend things out, give kids more time before they make their decision. And I think that helped Ole Miss land a couple of players down the stretch that they might not have gotten otherwise just because of their calendar and the way it's set up. So I think you're seeing a lot of that.
Are we legitimately talking about coaches trying to get their schools to change their curriculums to make it easier for them to get transfers? Like go to the school.
I mean, schools changing their curriculum would never happen.
I know we're a university and all, but we've got to prioritize the transfer portal. So if we could change from semesters to quarters, that would be great. Like, are we legitimately saying that?
No, I just framed the question that way. So unless Hummer knows something I don't know, I wanted to bring to light the whole quarter.
But
because I don't think that's going to go too well.
But here's where, and this is where, and Bud, you could speak to this because I know at the coaches convention, like this is a popular topic with NIL and the transfer portal is just the unknown and the uncertainty and the lack of any structure, any calendar. I think it's a major problem, and no one's really talking about it because no one feels bad for the coaches. Oh, you guys make all the millions. No one feels bad for them, but it is making their jobs much tougher, especially these player personnel guys managing scholarships, managing rosters. I like at the base root of it, you feel like if you got a calendar where you at least put some dates on this. All right, here's when you can enter the transfer portal. Here's a 2-week period you can sign in it. I think it would help everybody. Do you think that could be like, is that coming, or are we? I mean, it's impossible to get things done in college football, get everybody on the same page. But it is a problem that people are looking at. Is there a solution that's on the horizon, or is everybody just kind of flying blind here?
So Chris was at the convention too. I'm interested to hear what he heard on this.
Yeah, I don't think there's an easy solution necessarily, and I think a lot of I feel bad for coaches. They make way more money than any of us could ever dream of, but the hours they put in right now, and I know it's hard to feel bad for a guy making $1 million a year to coach football, but like they don't really get vacations. They're working vacations, and right now with the way the transfer portal works, they maybe get like a 1-week window all year where they're technically off, and if something happens, they're still working during that window. It's not easy, and the imbalance with all of this, I think, certainly makes a difference. As for the transfer windows themselves, I think a lot of schools would love that. You have, let's say, a window after spring ball and then a window after the season for players to enter. But even that, I think, has its issues. There's an imbalance of resources. Like some Power 5 schools might have 1 or 2 recruiting guys to handle the load that's going to come with the evaluating and the recruiting with that. Other schools, and the SEC specifically, have 10 to 20 to handle that load. There's an imbalance of resource. I think y'all have talked about this before. There's also an issue with, can you really limit non-employees with a window for them to transfer and change jobs, especially when coaches don't have that same restriction? That's an issue. And honestly, I think the power dynamic would be difficult for players because, like, what's the stop? Like, let's say the window's up for spring and you have to transfer by the end of spring or you can't do it. What's the stop? What's the stop a coach from slow playing a guy for the whole window, like convincing him to stay, and then that coach adds a player last second, and you're kind of stuck with that team for another year just because the coach essentially mismanaged your situation and you're kind of out of it. So I think there's a lot of concerns. I know there's a lot of momentum for windows like that. I don't know if it'll happen this year just because of some of the problems associated with it, but something will have to change eventually because it is a very difficult thing to manage right now. And it's just super chaotic.
Chris, I'm glad you brought up the point about what some of the G5 schools were saying there. We were having drinks. Well, I don't know if you were there that night. Anyway, I was having drinks with the coach at AFCA, and he was transfer portal window. Got to have it. Right. His DPP was like, no, we can handle the load of evaluations of 5 or 6 kids who we think might be in our range who come in a day over like a 100-day period. If you have all these kids jump into the portal, everybody in the pool at once, we do not have the staffing, and they're a decent G5 program, to handle that, right? Like that, there's no way we can make all these evaluations. It's going to cause bad fits for kids, and we just don't have the staffing to handle that. And that's probably a bigger issue, kind of outside the scope maybe of this show with the P5, G5 disparities that seem to be growing. But I don't know that they're going to get the votes for this, because some people are going to say, no, this is a waste of time because it's going to be litigation city. Other people are going to be like, no, just for practical matters. But here's something that was posed to me. I wanted to get your thoughts on this. I think the Tennessee situation with the Wyoming receiver, who now, of course, I'm blanking on his name. Was it Neer? Yeah. Who ended up going to Texas. He was enrolled at Tennessee, but had not taken a class yet, right? I think, according to the screenshots of the student directory. I think coaches would like to somehow get these guys to sign some sort of not NIL, but national letter of intent type paperwork to at least, if they sign it, they're off the books. And like, you can at least count on those guys as being in, I guess. Yeah,
I think that's a slam dunk proposal personally. I know the transfer recruiting process is very constricted, and the timeline is advanced considerably, but I feel like once you commit as a transfer, you should be locked in. You should have the option to sign immediately instead of having to enroll in classes. We saw that with Dylan Gabriel at UCLA. He was supposed to literally take his first class that Monday. He doesn't show up for class. I know some UCLA folks were like, what's happening? They make panic calls, and like they found out the quarterback they were building their 2022 season around 2023 as well was just not going. He was going to show up at Oklahoma, and they had no idea. Well, not no idea, but they figured it out in a way they probably shouldn't have had to. So I do think once you make that transfer commitment, you take a very valuable spot for these teams. Your numbers are up in the air, and once you get a commitment, you expect to at least keep that transfer commitment. I think they should have the option at least to sign right away, because I think that would make things easier for everyone. And frankly, like if I was a player, I'd want to get it done too, but you never know who's going to get in your ear, I suppose. So I understand why players want to keep that leverage.
How do, like, talking about being at the coaches convention, based on coaches that you talk to, on a scale of 1 to 10, and Bud, Danny, this is open to you guys as well, like 10 being hate and 1 being love, how do coaches feel about the transfer portal overall, at least the ones you talk to?
I think it's like a 5. It's a pain in the ass. Oh, I don't know if I can curse.
Go for it. Pain in the ass.
It's a pain in the ass. But also it's a very valuable roster tool. I think it closes the gap. I know we're going to probably talk about Alabama right now and what they're doing in the portal and how loaded they're going to be. But it also gives the Nebraskas of the world a chance for Scott Frost to save his job. It gives the SMUs of the world a chance to add players they never would have been able to through recruiting. So I think for most coaches, they see it as an opportunity, even if it is a lot of work for them and a bit of a pain.
Wouldn't you say 5 years ago, coaches would have said 10 out of 10, I hate it. Like, I don't want to deal with it. And then have we seen some more, maybe 10 years ago for sure. But I think it's changed rapidly, where you've seen the success stories of a Joe Burrow, a Justin Fields, like you can go down the list of success stories, Jameson Williams, and you can see, okay, this can be a good thing. We can tweak our roster where, yeah, it's more work, but I think, and not only the coaches you mentioned, but I look at a guy like new coaching hires when you're kind of hired late in the game, you miss out on that December signing class. And so you're trying to scrape together and you can build. I mean, even a guy like Greg Schiano at Rutgers, what he did, and at Michigan State, like the turnarounds happen quicker now because you're able to get experienced bodies out there. But I do think the coaches wouldn't have admitted because they were always worried about recruiting and their attitudes toward things. But I think now there have been more coaches that have embraced it, except for Dabo, that are just looking at it and saying, yeah, this can be an asset. And it's just becoming more like, free agency and an NFL type of operation.
I will say I talked to one coach, and I would say for the people I talked to, it's probably closer to 5.5, 6. But I talked to one coach who's at a Power 5 school, and the concerns he kind of expressed where he's at a school, it's in the Big 12. I'm not going to air them out, but like they're not Oklahoma or Texas. They are one of the programs that, they bring guys in, they develop them, and it works for them. And, they have their success doing it. The concern that this coach brings up, though, is that he's worried about how the transfer portal is going to impact just a program's ability to develop players in that I'm trying to think of the way he phrased it, but in that programs aren't going to feel it is necessary to develop the players themselves, because it's going to be about, well, we could just go to the portal and find guys who just kind of fit what we need any single year. And it becomes less and less about high school. And like you said earlier, like as far as high school recruits last year, there were fewer than there typically are, although I'm guessing COVID had a lot to do with it. But he's concerned that a lot of schools are putting a lot less emphasis on the high school recruiting, which his program is hoping to take advantage of. Obviously, they're trying to counter it, but he's just like, that's one thing I was wondering what you guys think about that kind of process. Is the development of players going to become more secondary than just acquiring the players we need who might already be developed? And kind of touching on what Chris, you mentioned earlier with Alabama too, the way that they've just been able to go and pluck some guys to fill holes right away. Like, is that something that could just become a trend by large across the country?
I think, as you said, honestly, frankly, if I was that school, I'd be very excited if schools were going to stop focusing on developing, because that's a huge advantage for you. There are already more options for, I don't want to say lower tier high school recruits, but after about 500, there are a lot of hidden gems out there. And if you put the time in and you identify who you need, you're going to get a lot of players now that you might not have been able to get 3 or 4 years ago, because a school like, I don't know, like South Carolina last year took like 18 transfers. Like, there are just more players available to the lower part of the Power 5 in terms of resources and kind of overall recruiting expectations in the top half of the G5 than there ever have been before. So if I was one of those schools and worried about development, I would just totally shift my focus to high school. And that's something, talking to a couple of G5 directors early last year, they were taking far fewer high school kids early so they could get a lot of the kids that fell down later, because there's just going to be so many options available late in the cycle. And I just think it's one of those things where you can take advantage of not necessarily a loophole, but invalued asset in a way in this era, just because there's so many players out there and so many different strategies and ways to approach the portal. You don't have to go portal heavy to do this. You can go development heavy and still have a lot of success. You might not be on the same track as a lot of other people. It's going to require some patience, but you can have a lot of success by still developing in college football, in my opinion.
And then you develop them at the G5 level, and you develop a baller, and then he leaves after 2 years to go to play in the SEC or Big Ten. Like, that's the dynamic that we're in, that I think that's what, and I would hate that too. You invest those resources into young players, and it's the risk you run.
I will say, and I get this a lot, you see some of those players move. Like, and undoubtedly, we see like a Jacob Cowing go from UTEP to Arizona. That's their best wide receiver, one of the best wide receivers in G5 on the move. But I think if you look at the best G5 programs, the ones that have a lot of success, you do not see a lot of their best players leaving, because the culture there is so strong. So ultimately, in those situations, I keep getting told it comes down to culture and how you treat your players, because your best players at a good G5 program are not usually going to leave. We didn't see Billy Napier in Louisiana lose their best players the last couple of years. Obviously, it's changed this offseason with the coaching change at the top. But a lot of those really good group of 5 teams that have those really good players aren't losing them in the portal as frequently as people think, because the culture there is so strong. And opportunities to win are so strong as well. So I just think it depends on the situation. If you're Todd Graham at Hawaii and you're losing your best players, it's because you got some problems on the back end. You know what I mean? So I think it's really situational with that. But who I feel bad for in that situation is the FCS. The FCS best players like a Cameron Ward are leaving because they have the opportunity to go play a different level of football. So I think those are the teams that are really, really hurt by it. But personally, I think if you have really good culture, you're not going to lose many of your great players on the group of 5 level just because like you're going to be able to retain those guys.
It is to me like one of those problems that coaches are going to complain about, even if the numbers, like Chris said, probably don't back it up a ton. But I talked to a guy at the convention that Chris and I were at, and he's like, this is where, like, we're a G5 school. We're not going to be competing. Not that you're allowed to spend NIL money on recruits ever, guys, of course, right? But NIL as a retention tool for players that we've developed in-house, because there is a dynamic where a player is potentially more valuable to your fan base if they've seen him come up through your program and have enjoyed him than he would be NIL-wise to a new program. I think the Mackenzie Milton UCF FSU dynamic would be a good example of this, right? Like Mackenzie's always going to matter a whole lot more to UCF fans than he would to FSU fans, even if he ended up being healthy and had a good year last year, which, unfortunately, until I asked, he didn't. But that's where you need to get your boosters together and be able to, like, hey, man, we've never steered you wrong. We've developed you. We've built our system around you. We're going to continue to showcase you. And here's $25K through an NIL deal that our boosters have been able to put together for your junior year, for your senior year. Kind of in the same way that some of the better P5 programs might be using NIL money to keep their potential 5th-round draft picks from going to the league before they potentially should. Chris, how are you seeing programs change their strategy as far as like how many guys they take, and then also their hiring practices to adapt or take advantage of the portal?
Well, you're certainly seeing a lot of transfer portal scouts essentially being hired. Florida just added one. We have Ohio State has a guy, like a former NFL scout, specifically there to just sit there all season and essentially evaluate every player that could possibly enter the portal. And then they have grades on them. So as soon as they enter, they have essentially a take or a not take written down and see if they can go after the transfer. So we're seeing some of that. In terms of like strategy of roster construction, I like to think of, there's quite a few different transfer portal strategies. One day we're gonna have to write an article labeling all of these, but you have your Alabama, your Ohio State, your Georgia, your contender that's gonna add 1 or 2 pieces to plug any holes that they might have, even though it's kind of laughable that an Alabama might have a hole, you know what I mean? Like compared to the rest of us. There are the choosy Power 5 as well. That's kind of how I consider that group. There's the desperate Power 5, I think is a good way to put it. So the coaches that might lose their job here in 6 months that really need to make an immediate impact, you're going to see them take 10 to 12 guys to try to fix immediate roster holes. I don't want to say Scott Frost is desperate, but I think Nebraska is an excellent example of that. This offseason, you have the group of 5 team that really loads up at home. Your Dallas, your Florida, those programs, your Houstons that are getting a lot of players that are dropping from the Power 5 that are heading there to go back to someplace closer to home. And they're getting levels of talent they never would before. There are a lot of different little examples of this, but I think right now you're seeing a lot of schools choose transfers over. I think this is the key differentiator. You're seeing transfers over borderline high school recruits in a way we've never seen before. So a guy you were taking a flyer on late in the cycle because you like some of his traits, that guy is not ending up on the Power 5 or the group of 5 as frequently as he used to see. And that's what creates that 500 player gap that we talked about last year. I don't know what the number is going to be this year at the end of the cycle. But that's why we're seeing so few high school players entering or finding spots. It's because there's always going to be a transfer out there that fits your need and is more of a guarantee than you would see from the high school prospect.
It also makes me wonder if some of these schools are no longer going to recruit the high school level for floor, right? Because you feel like you can go out and achieve a decent floor player, a contributor, be a potential starter or somebody who you're confident can play as a reserve. And if I'm running high school recruiting now for a program, especially like a good P5 program, I'm only thinking upside. If the kid doesn't work out, okay, we'll get somebody else in the portal. But if your ceiling is only like a starter, but not like a really, really good starter, I'm probably going to pass. I just want to shoot the moon on all these because I feel like there's no real downside to go into the portal to get depth.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so kind of like an NBA draft approach where everybody just drafts guys on maybe they'll be a superstar instead of, hey, this guy's actually good.
Yes. And high school coaches I know hate this because I think this is already starting to happen at some places. And they're like, this is a really good high school player, man. He might not be a first round pick, but like, you can't tell me he can't go play at, not a Bama, that's a bad example, but like an Oklahoma State or a South Carolina or a Indiana or somewhere like that, right? And they're maybe those aren't the great examples. Of I guess Carolina's going pretty portal heavy, but it's definitely impacting the high school level, as Chris said, a lot. It's interesting. So let's talk Bama. They had 3 holes, and they've basically gone and addressed them with.
Yeah.
It's pretty ridiculous, right? I mean, good on Nick Saban.
He warned everybody, right? Like he tried.
Well, my favorite was when Saban had that quote and the way it went around on Twitter where like everybody's dunking on him like, oh, Saban's afraid of the transfer portal. Things are going to change. It's like, no, he's just sending a warning shot because he's already got everybody he wants lined up just ready to come in. And then a couple days after that, it's like, oh, Jahmyr Gibbs, Alabama. It's like all this stuff is happening. I talked about this earlier on the pod. It's like we had the question in the mailbag last week, I think it was, about like, will the transfer portal be able to improve the floor of programs like Arkansas and these other mid-tier Power 5 kind of schools? And it's no, because all the great players that are transferring that will be available are just going to be getting vacuumed into the playoff contenders already. So it's not going to change anything, I don't think.
Tom, I know y'all. I know you're a big Premier League fan. I don't probably follow it as close as you and Chip do, but it's very Premier League like. Mm-hmm. Like if you're gonna see a great player on the move, he's gonna go to one of the 5 schools. Essentially,
there's like 10 teams. Every single great player ends up at eventually.
Yeah,
and that's kind of. It's like Danny, like you were mentioning earlier, like with like these G5 schools where maybe a G5 program finds this high schooler, gets them to come in, develops them, and then they leave for Alabama after a couple years. And I'm wondering if we might see some programs kind of take a similar approach to Chris brought up soccer first, so talk to him. But like there are some clubs in soccer in Europe who in the leagues, basically what they do is they find young players, they develop them, and then they sell them on to bigger clubs to make money. And that's kind of how they sustain their team, their profits, all that kind of stuff. I wonder if we're going to see some programs eventually, not right away, it will take time, but maybe kind of take a similar approach where they go to high schoolers and say, listen, you come here, we'll develop you, you stay here. And then if you don't, if you get the chance, you can leave. But at the very minimum, you're going to come here, you're going to play, and we're going to turn you into a good football player. And that will kind of become what their quote unquote brand is.
Tom, you know what you're describing?
Yeah.
A JUCO.
Yeah, but that's basically what I'm saying.
Right. Like with a defined endpoint. That's.
But I was really hoping you were. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say what we're kind of in every aspect, we're getting more and more like professional sports. Mm-hmm. And the NFL is clearly the model that you look at. But I think the one area that's kind of naturally evolving potentially is it is minor league football, right? But it's a single A, double A, triple A type of model where the group of 5 will be perceived as maybe the lower tier guys that aren't good enough to get drafted right away. They go play it, single A or double A, whatever you want to call it. Maybe FCS is single A, group of 5 is double A, and some of the lower tier, Power 5 schools or a division. And then, because we've seen a lot of transfers within, the Power 5 level too. And it's just kind of this levels of play start to evolve, and guess what else starts to evolve? The pay scale for it. I mean, a lot of teams have pay scale on there of what they're paying, 4 stars, 5 stars. It'll be the same for, all right, this group of 5 guy balled out. Here's his pay scale. And it just kind of evolves into this, which is kind of crazy that there's no structure in place. Like those things were designed. It's just kind of happening. We're letting it morph into this, what it's becoming.
I think this brings up a really good point because did you guys read the Dennis Dodd article where he got the quote from Bubba Cunningham?
No.
It's a really good read that Dennis dropped late last week. I think he dropped it on Friday, but I read it yesterday morning. It's titled, "With the NCAA backed into a corner, the age of paying college athletes is officially upon us," which obviously it's not officially upon us yet, but I think the headline makes a lot of sense. Quote from Bubba Cunningham: "I do think we're probably 2 to 3 years away from having a different relationship with our student athletes. It won't necessarily be the student in the university. It may be employee-employer. You want to slow down the transfer portal? Put these guys on contracts, like actual contracts with either legitimate buyouts or, maybe no buyout language in there. Like that's definitely a way to slow this thing down. And then you don't have to have a transfer window. You have the guy's under contract or he's not. Sorry, I know that's kind of derailing the combo, but
that would require schools paying a little bit of that TV money that they want to keep. But,
yeah, for sure. So, all right, Bama killed it. They went and they got Jahmyr Gibbs from Georgia Tech.
Yep.
Jermaine Burton, who I know we had like a long discussion about why he was transferred from Georgia today. I don't want to get my Twitter like on fire again from all these Stetson Bennett stands. And then
hater.
Yeah, seriously, I am. Who was the other kid they got? They took 3.
Eli Ricks. So like basically the best
Yep.
cornerback in college football potentially. So just not a big deal.
Yeah, I wrote that thing earlier this week at CBSSports.com, which was the top 20 players who weren't draft eligible this year who will become draft eligible next year. And Alabama had 4 players in that top 20 list, and 2 of them weren't on their roster 2 months before. Gibbs and Ricks are 2 of those players. It's like, yeah, no, Alabama just plucks 2 of the top 20 players coming and just says, yeah, no, you're going to play for us now.
And you know what's crazy about Burton? If you look at his physical profile, just like his athletic testing traits, if he has one good year at Alabama, he's going to be a first round pick.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no question. He could easily be Jamison Williams.
He was like a 5-star out of high school, right?
He was a borderline 5-star,
4, yeah.
With an insane.
He's like a 4'4", like 42-inch vertical, like 3.95 shuttle, which is ridiculous. Like 6'2", like 220. He is a freak straight up. Like, and if he's going to have a more reliable quarterback, and I bet he's over 1,000 yards next year.
Get open.
Sorry.
I'm not going there. Fans. But I do want to ask you though, like, so we are seeing some teams take 14, 15 transfers in some cases, but realistically, that's usually just these guys who just got hired and they realize that trying to sign a bunch of high schoolers in a 10-day period is not advisable. Right now, we're not seeing championship teams, like the best teams in college football, the ones that are making the playoff, and especially the ones that are winning the playoff, they are not taking, like the vast majority of their player acquisition is still being done at the high school level. Like, do you think that's going to change to where we will see teams that are 40 or 50% portal win the national title? Or do you think they're still going to just bet on their own development?
No. I think you have to develop high school players. I do not think there's a reasonable strategy out there where you're landing 50% portal and winning a national title. You're always going to have to get the 5 stars. You're always going to have to get the high 4 stars. You're always going to have that essentially floor on your roster of players you've developed, players that have been through your program, players that are in your culture to win a national title. I would be shocked if we ever get to a point where I don't know a good example. Like let's say Florida State's taking like 10 kids a cycle right now. I think Florida State's going to have to cycle down with the number of transfers they're taking if they ever hope to win a national title again, because 1, they're going to be in a position to win games and get recruits they're not able to get right now, at least consistently. And 2, just because I don't think it's a feasible long-term strategy, because you have to, it's even harder. Like it's hard to hit on a high school player, and there are advantages in the portal when you do that. But a transfer miss is devastating because it's a scholarship loss. You don't get that back right away. Like there are a lot of penalties that come with that. And I just think the high school route gives you a lot more flexibility long-term than the transfer portal strategy. And I don't think you'll ever see an Alabama taking 10 or 12 transfers a cycle.
All right, let's go ahead and throw it a break real fast. On the other side of the break, we're going to talk about some of Hummer's favorite guys in the portal, some gems that our ratings team uncovered, and basically just talk a little more strategy, which teams are taking advantage of this, and maybe who else could jump in. We'll see you guys in a second.
I heard 1,000 stories, but none could describe this place. and must be witnessed to be understood.
I admire your courage. If you're gonna pick a fight, you can't win before long.
The road west is filled with failure. We are in the land of no mercy now.
1883, new series now streaming exclusively on Paramount Plus.
And we're back on the Cover 3 podcast. Does Chip do the "and we're back" from the ad break?
I don't know. I don't listen to Chip. Who pays attention to Chip?
I usually just mute myself during the ad break and like drink some water or whatever, and then I realize like Chip's asked me a question, so I probably need to start paying attention. All right. Mayor of Kingstown. Yeah, we were chatting about Paramount Plus. Mayor of Kingstown actually, I think is pretty solid. So we won't share Daddy's comment on the other one, but that is very
I thoroughly enjoyed 1883. Still right in it. That's excellent. Definitely go watch.
awesome. So Hummer, enough Alabama talk. We've talked a whole lot on this show about LSU and USC and what they've done in the portal, and we'll do so again. So I don't really want to like rehash that for our listeners. Let's go like not down ballot, but just a couple spots down. Who are the programs in your opinion that are doing the best with the transfer portal right now? Kind of relative to I guess overall, but then also relative to their resources and their success.
I think there's a few teams. I'll start out with some Kansas love. That probably doesn't happen too often.
No, we try to talk all teams.
Yeah, but I just meant in general. I think Lance Leipold's done a really nice job. Kansas was killed in the portal last year with the late coaching change that they had, but they've added some really high upside guys. Kai Thomas at running back coming over from Minnesota, I think is going to pair really nicely with what they already have. Their backfield's going to be pretty disgusting next year. They actually have three former 4-star prospects from the 2020 class on that roster right now, including Devin Neal, who had a bit of a breakout late last season. I think they're going to run the ball really well with their wide zone scheme. Eric Gilliard coming over from UCF at linebacker, multi-year starter for UCF, all-conference player. I think he's going to be a plug-and-play starter for Kansas. That's really nice. And I think like Craig Young coming over from Ohio State, going to Kansas, he's already probably the most athletic player on the roster instantly. He wasn't starting at Ohio State, but I think at Kansas, he'll make an immediate impact in terms of the athleticism on the back end. I really like what Kansas has done. Arizona probably deserves some love, specifically because they finally addressed their quarterback situation with Jaden Delara coming over from Arizona. But not only that, they also added Jacob Cowing, who we talked about earlier from UTEP. He's one of the best receivers in the group of 5. You add that to a pretty disgusting 2022 class for Arizona. And that skill group, especially, all of a sudden is pretty dangerous. I think they're going to be a lot of fun. As long as that offensive line doesn't pull like a Cincinnati Bengals, they'll be fine. I really like what UCLA's done, like quietly. I know USC's gotten a lot of the attention, but they've added some really nice impact players. Jake Bobo, a wide receiver coming over from Duke. Darius Masu coming over from Hawaii. Probably the best player on the Hawaii roster last year. Plug and play starter for them in the middle. Jacob Sykes, who they just got
they got
from
the D
Harvard.
tackle?
Yeah.
Coming over that kid's Harvard. Good.
Yeah, he's going to be an immediate impact player for UCLA. Will start right away, probably at 3-tech. I think UCLA has done a really nice job. South Carolina, they had the headline players with Rattler and Stogner, but Devontae Reed from Central Michigan is going to be an instant starter for them. Antoine Wells from James Madison's really good. I think there's a lot of teams, frankly, right now doing a very nice job in the portal just because there's so many good players in the portal. I think it's just managing what you lose on the other side of that really makes a huge difference. But those are some of the teams that come top to mind when you talk about teams further down the portal rankings.
It seems to me, I mean, Arizona and Kansas, they're probably selling new coach smell, new era, but they're also likely selling playing time. Like this is really important. Maybe if you're a show that talks about, I don't know, sports wagering or anything like that ever, these guys probably should not have a win total of, 3 for Arizona, or what was Kansas last year? 1.5, I think.
Yes.
If that.
I mean, because they had the FCS game, and then I think it was 1.5.
No, it was 1.5 because I was on the under and I lost.
Yeah, because they beat.
Mm-hmm. Shout out to Texas.
Yeah,
go Horns, hook them. Thank you.
Mr. Applebee's catching a touchdown. What as far as the coaches who are new, right? Brian Kelly and Riley and Billy Napier. I think that's probably the majority of the new hires. Based on what USC has done so far, I know we said we wouldn't talk USC, but I do have to ask this one. Are they your favorite very early in the Pac-12, or at least in the Pac-12 South. I guess Utah's still in the South. What do you think about what they're doing right now? Like the level of commits they have, is that something that's going to vault them up immediately, or is it more of like a jump start?
I think in the short term it's very helpful, but USC's problem the last couple of years has been their offensive line and their strength up front on defense. And I think Alex Grinch's defense is going to need a year or two to get the pieces in that he wants. And if you look at USC's transfer class, as good as it is, there's not a lot of impact offensive linemen. They got a tackle from Virginia, who I think is probably going to start, but like I think it's going to take Lincoln Riley a couple of years of recruiting to really get that offensive line where he needs it to be to compete for championships. It might be okay in the Pac-12. I like Oregon and Utah heading into next season. Those would be my two favorites. UCLA is right there as well. But I still think USC has some issues it needs to address. And quarterback kind of hangs over that right now too, because you might be Miller Moss and that's about it right now if you don't get Caleb Williams.
No, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, I was just going to say, and that's why I'm pretty sure they're going to get Caleb Williams.
Me too. So then where does that leave Jackson Dart?
He's
Ole Miss, most likely.
Ole Miss, yeah. Jackson Dart is kind of like an Ole Miss QB. He kind of fills that Matt Corral eye black hole that they're going to be missing next year. He just steps right in, grabs the same eye black, and bam, you just keep going. It makes so much sense.
That Anakin Skywalker vibe, yeah.
I like that. Chris, who are, for college football fans out there who are not following the 247 Sports transfer portal and not following Chris, first of all, y'all need to do so, but a taste of what they would get if they're following you. Who are some names, let's go like non-P5 and FCS names, who college football fans are going to need to know in the fall? Got guys who you and your recruiting team and the guys that put the ranking on this, including Derek Chang and obviously Brew, guys who have worked in college sports before doing this for us. Who are some guys that were just pleasant surprises? Like, oh man, this guy can really play. Like it's a chance for him to move up and explode on the scene.
Yeah, all credit to Derek and to Clint. Clint's a former Power 5 quarterback, and Derek obviously had a long career. I just report on stuff, but I think, I don't know how much of a sleeper you're talking. Cameron Ward, I don't think is a sleeper, but he's going to start at Washington State next year. He's going to throw for more than 4,000 yards in that Eric Morris air raid. He's going to be a name to know. I think Washington State could be really interesting.
Like they felt he was an upgrade on Delora, who when he was healthy, like played pretty damn well for Washington State. Like that says something, right? That they're like, hey, we're willing to upset our quarterback room to get this kid.
I don't want to hype up Cameron Ward too much, but I'm going to do it because I had multiple like player personnel and coaches tell me they think he's a borderline generational talent. Wow. He was a wing T quarterback in high school, had almost no film to speak of. I think he threw the ball a total of like 200 times his entire high school career. Eric Morris took a chance on his frame at Incarnate Word. He won the Jerry Rice Award, which is given to the best freshman in the FCS. That's the same award Trey Lance won. He was the follow-up winner. Cameron Ward lit the world on fire last year at Incarnate Word. He's still like, there's some raw things with him in terms of processing, decision-making, just stuff he hasn't done for long. But in that system with his traits and like some of the throws he makes, guys, like some of the throws and the arm angles he has, the arm strength he has, he is a future first-round type talent if you can put it all together. I'm giving it a hard sell, but like this is backed up by like coaches telling me the same things. Like he could legitimately be the best quarterback in the Pac-12 next year. Maybe if Caleb Williams is there, it's a different question, but he is that talented. So I think that's a name people certainly need to know going into next year is Cameron Ward.
So are you taking the over on Wazoo's win total then?
What is Wazoo's win total?
I don't know, but I'm assuming you'll be on the over.
I think, yeah, maybe. Depending on how quickly Eric Morris can get his offense installed, I think Cameron Ward helps with that. Wazoo's got a pretty talented roster. There is some stability there with Dickert staying over essentially. So, yeah, I think the Pac-12 North is totally there for the taking right now. Washington's going to be down. I think Oregon's going to be good, but Stanford's clearly down. Oregon State is going to be what it has been. Cal's a question mark. I think they're just what they are under Justin Wilcox, which is a pretty good defensive team and a team that is not going to scare you offensively. So I think Washington State could make some noise. I think Washington State could easily be like an 8-win team next year if things break right, maybe even better.
Oh, they do. Oh, they draw USC and Utah from the South. That's.
Oh, I would like to rescind my previous comment.
No, it's on the record now. It's too late. Can't go back.
But maybe that means Hummer will get like a nice like 6 flat or maybe a 6.5 number with some juice, and he can go over and if they go 7-5.
It'd be a great way for Cameron Ward to play himself into a first-round pick is by beating USC and Utah.
Exposure.
I think people are going to tune into Pac-12 After Dark this year. They're going to turn on Washington State and they're going to go, who the heck is that kid?
He's going to be like the cult figure of the 2022 season.
He's going to be. I mean, Washington State has had its share of like awesome quarterbacks the last decade, and I think Cameron Ward is the most naturally talented of that group that have come through, like without question. I think he's going to put Luke Falk and Gardner Minshew, who were excellent on their own. Like the level of talent in Cameron Ward's right arm is just insane compared to those guys. So it'll be really fun to follow.
Can Texas block? Because I am just so excited about the potential they have on the outside. Let's talk about the upgrades to the Texas passing game.
I mean, their recruiting class. I will say Texas. I don't know like what kind of deal Steve Sarkisian made with somebody to make this happen. Like, did he pull Tom Brady and make a deal with the devil or something like that? But things broke so well for Texas after losing to Kansas. Like Steve Sarkisian had no business landing the class he did, but they put together one of the best offensive line classes at Texas in probably the last 25 years, arguably the best offensive line class in the country. I don't know how much that group is going to help right away, but I know for a fact Texas was going to take some grad transfer offensive linemen, some transfer help that was going to help immediately, and had to turn some of those guys away because their recruiting class was so good. Whether that translates on the offensive line next year, I think is a question mark. Obviously, offensive line takes the longest to develop out of any position. I don't know if that's going to be much better in front of Hudson Card or Quinn Ewers, but when you talk about the long-term prospects of that line, it should be much better. Immediately, I don't know, but Bijan Robinson's going to be good no matter what. So I guess we'll find out.
I think about the pass catchers they got in the portal, plus Ewers. I mean, so I assume we heard all good things on Near. Or was he kind of a mixed feedback kid? Okay.
No, I think we have him as a 4-star, like a low 4-star. So we consider him an impact guy right away. And I think Texas really needs some stability besides Xavier Worthy. They were hoping Jordan Whittington would be that guy, but he just has not been able to stay healthy during his entire career. But if he's healthy next year in the slot and you have Isaiah on the other side, that's a pretty dirty wide receiver trio Texas is working, especially when you think about them losing Joshua Moore to the portal and a couple of the other guys that have been on the fence. So Texas could be really explosive on the outside if they get things working.
Chris, who's a guy or two who we got really differing feedback on? Like I know we do talk to a lot of personnel people in addition to doing our own evals and looking back at what we had on these guys in high school too. But I just know from years past, sometimes that I feel like the opinions on these high school players are not quite as varied, right? Because everybody gets the same, pretty much subscribes to the same services. You get the same verified times and stuff. When I would talk to coaches about different guys in the portal, I would get like wildly different feedback. Like some people will tell me this guy's a total stud. And other people are like, dude, he never bounced back from the torn ACL. We were playing him at fullback, I mean, the Lingard grade that we on Lorenzo Lingard was a good example of that from Miami a couple of years ago. It's like Miami was like, and UF was really, really excited about him. I guess his career's still ongoing, but who are some guys, not to name the schools that told you he sucks or he's great, but like who are some of the guys that you're really interested to watch to see who was right about their strong takes?
I mean, Cameron Ward's actually one of them. I've had some people like really worry about how raw he is. I don't want to focus too much on quarterbacks, but they're just top of mind all the time. I think JT Daniels is a really good example of that. We'll see where he ends up. I've had some schools still tell me they think he could be an NFL player like quite easily. The way he processes, how cerebral he is, how smart he is. I've also had a couple schools tell me he's totally washed. They worry about his injury history. He hasn't been healthy since his freshman year of college, essentially. But I think people forget we had him just behind Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence in the 2018 class. Mm-hmm. He was the number one quarterback in the class that included Spencer Rattler, who I think is another guy where you get mixed feedback on, not really because of talent, but because of personality, I think is a better way.
If you watch QB1.
Yeah. Okay, so everybody, Spencer, I don't think he was the easiest to deal with at Oklahoma, especially when he wasn't starting. So I'm curious how that South Carolina experiment goes. But JT Daniels is a really interesting one. I don't know where he's going to end up. I think there's a pretty decent chance it's a group of 5 school on the West Coast. But I still believe in JT Daniels. I think he can be an NFL player, but I've talked to some people that think he's totally done. So I'm very, very curious to see what that's going to look like next year.
I lean on the side of done if he's not beating out Stetson Bennett. Like
he just wasn't healthy this year. I will say that. And I don't know if I think Stetson had the locker room and
because he was healthy. Like I think there's something to like that. Part of being a quarterback is being, durable and being able to withstand the hits. And they were odd injuries too. That the ACL is one thing that's everybody deals with that, but oblique and lat, those are injuries that are hard to put an X-ray on or an MRI on and say this is it. And so then it becomes a pain tolerance thing, and then your teammates start to look at you differently. I think that's why he lost the team at Georgia. I think players saw him in the training room all the time, and they just checked out on him. And maybe he can get 100% and he moves on. Everything's fresh and he gets a fresh start. But I don't know. I'm not as sold on JT because, I was telling these guys, I watched Stetson Bennett warm up and was kind of dumbfounded. I'm like, holy cow, this looked like a 4th or 5th string walk-on like that I had at Florida State that looked like they barely started for their high school team. And not to take away, he still won it all and he did it. But I was just a little bit surprised that JT couldn't, hold him off.
Yeah, Stetson looked like a lot of us in Good Morning America after a really long night out. And I don't even mean just like the eyes and everything. I mean like the physical stature. He looked like a lot of us. So it's very interesting.
Absolutely. Chris, what do you think is coming next for the portal? Are we going to get a portal combine someday? Do you think we're going to have any guys is there anybody that you're either watching to see if they jump in right now that you want to reveal on the show? I don't know if it's really smart to break news in the 56th minute of a podcast, but especially not one that won't be released till later today. Or are there any holes at schools out there that they're still waiting on guys to fill? It's like, well, this school's going to take a tackle or a receiver or whatever, but they're waiting.
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of schools still waiting to fill specific spots. And I still think we're going to see a lot of volume of movement. I will say, and we can maybe talk again and not talk about quarterbacks specifically, but I had a coach tell me the other day they think there's going to be a big run on quarterbacks after the spring. And there's still some schools that are looking to solve that situation. Some Power 5 schools even. A lot of schools in the group of 5 would love to upgrade a quarterback, certainly, but some Power 5 schools as well. Like I'm thinking about a Missouri or West Virginia that if somebody falls in their lap, they're not going to say no. You know what I mean? So I think we're going to see a run of that in the spring. And every school in the country is still looking for another offensive tackle, another offensive guard. So if those guys go in, everybody from Clemson to Alabama to Ohio State would love to upgrade that position. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of pending kind of decisions that need to be made. We at 247 Sports broke last night that Kamar Whedon is going in the portal, a former 5-star running back. And I think you're going to see several players of that stature still decide to enter the portal over the next couple months as they see where they fit on the depth chart, or maybe they get offered some deals on the side for NIL or what have it. We're seeing a lot of that right now.
Well, that's the balancing of the room you talked about, though, right? I mean, when we talked about Caleb, maybe an SEC school that recently won the national title, worrying about its current quarterback room. But I know you mentioned on the College Ball Daily, which is a podcast with Trey Scott, you guys should absolutely go listen to as well every day, that Ohio State didn't want to take risks because it might cause a mass transfer in their corner room. How often do you think that situation is something maybe that fans don't understand, that we can't just go shopping for every position in the portal because it could wreck our long-term future, I guess?
I think people don't consider that at all. I think they see somebody go in the portal and they're like, we need to jump on that. It's definitely played a factor at LSU with Eli Ricks. They added Tanner McAllister to that room from Oklahoma State, but he's going to play safety. Ohio State was legitimately worried about 3 players auto entering as soon as they added another corner like Eli, because they felt Eli was going to be guaranteed to start. And I don't think that's the case. Eli's just better than everybody in that room. But there were a lot of people in that room that were essentially using whatever leverage they had to prevent that from happening. And we see that at a couple of places. Like I mentioned Georgia earlier with Caleb, in the Caleb Williams front, at least offhand, I think Kirby Smart is worried about upsetting the apple cart with his room if they go hard after Caleb Williams. I think that's the same thing at Miami. They're worried about not only like potentially losing Tyler Van Dyke, but they're worried about their wide receivers getting upset. There's a lot of things you have to balance. And there's a lot of personalities you have to balance with 85 players on a roster. And what is that, like probably 200 other parents, figures, influencers that are around these people that think they have a say. So there's a lot to that. And coaches have to be very careful when they add a player. And which is why I don't think you see a lot of transfers talk. Like on the college basketball side of things, these guys do interviews all the time. Coaches definitely tell, especially at like positions like quarterback, they ask quarterbacks not to talk to the media because they don't want it out there that they're pursuing that player. Like there's a lot that goes into that and a lot of secretive stuff with that because they don't want to spook their rooms.
Awesome, man. Tom, Danny, you guys anything else?
No.
Good, man.
Look at us. We're right at an hour. That is perfect.
Hitting our marks.
Hey guys, what do? We hit thumbs up if we're on that green texture like Chris Hummer, which maybe that's the secret to getting all this scoop is to go back to an Android. I should never switch to an iPhone. Go ahead and give us 5 stars on Spotify. If you're a longtime OG of Apple Pods, keep in mind you can give us another 5-star review if you've already given us one, as long as it's been a couple weeks. So go ahead and give us another one there, and 5 stars, thumbs up, like, subscribe, all that stuff. See you again tomorrow.